right, hi everybody. My name is Roberto Pecora. I'm the Director of Building Decarbonization at the Zero Emissions Innovation Center. And ZEEC, as it's known, is actually a urban decarbonization center that's at the moment focused mainly on buildings, decarbonizing buildings in large urban centers, but we really do cover a lot of BC, if not all of BC. And we've got other areas of focus as well, including transportation and renewable energy. But today's conversation is really going to focus on buildings. And one of the 5 building decarbonization programs at ZEEC is the Building to Electrification Coalition that's led by Mariko. Mariko, over to you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mariko Makashu. I'm the program manager for the Building to Electrification Coalition, also known as B2E. B2E is a member-based organization based in BC, focused on decarbonization of buildings through electrification. We have, I think, over 215 organizational members now involved in this coalition, and we're specifically looking at electrification as a critical strategy to have to achieve deep, immediate, and real emissions reductions in buildings as soon as we electrify them. So Craig is joining us today from City of Vancouver and is a veteran when it comes to electrifying buildings at the City of Vancouver. So Craig, I want to pass it over to you so you can tell us a little bit about yourself and about your career at City of Vancouver.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for the introduction. Yes, my name's Craig Edwards. I'm the manager of energy and utilities at the City of Vancouver in the facilities department called Real Estate and Facilities Management. And the city owns about over 600 buildings, owns and manages over 600 buildings, different types of like community centers, fire halls, libraries, police buildings, things like that. And I've been with the city for 12 years, almost 12 years now, as the manager of energy and utilities. My responsibilities, the main focus of my role is actually focusing on reducing greenhouse gas emissions in our city-owned building portfolio. The role entails a few other things, managing the utilities and looking at setting the standards for broader sustainability standards for our city-owned buildings. But the main focus is on providing leadership for reducing greenhouse gas emissions for city-owned buildings, and that's what I've been focusing on.
Craig, what's your like educational background prior to coming to the city? What did you study and do before the City of Vancouver?
Yeah, well, I started out with I did a mechanical engineering degree at the University of Waterloo. And then shortly afterwards, I really wanted to get into the green building industry. So the pathway that seemed easiest was to do a master's in architecture at UBC under Ray Cole, who was kind of the granddaddy of green buildings back in the 1990s and early 2000s. Then after that, I worked as a consultant for a few different firms doing building science research. I was a building envelope consultant in the early days of the leaky condo crisis in Vancouver, where I saw that we spent tens of millions or billions of dollars on redoing the building envelope on buildings to fix the leaks, but we weren't focusing on energy performance at all. So really motivated me to get into the energy reduction field. Then I worked as an energy manager for BC Housing for a number of years, and then the energy manager for the Rocky Mountain School District, and then came back to the City of Vancouver about 12 years ago, and have been providing leadership on all the new construction projects that we've been building, and then managing retrofits of the existing buildings to reduce greenhouse gas emissions.
So On the note of standards, what are the City of Vancouver standards for non-City of Vancouver buildings? Do you know those, what they are right now?
Yeah, sure. So the Vancouver is somewhat unique because we're a charter city, so we can set our own building code. So our building code is called the Vancouver Building Bylaw, and the current standards have been they've been developing over time. In 2016, the staff directed by council came up with a zero emission building plan to adopt more and more strict standards to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from buildings in the building code, and it's been ramping up over time with the goal of trying to get to zero emissions for all buildings by 2030. There was an update in 2023 which basically brings most of the large buildings being built in the city to require almost all electric heating and domestic hot water systems with really aggressive greenhouse gas intensity targets that they have to achieve. And it applies to multi-unit residential and retail and office and a few other building types. And then just recently in the fall, there was a council motion to bring natural gas back into new construction, which was defeated. And through the staff report that was generated as part of that process, we actually increased the standards for new construction slightly to step 3 of the provincial zero carbon step code. So that'll bring reduce the greenhouse gas intensity of a few types of buildings a little bit further, and it's coming into play in March. So it'll reduce it for buildings over multi-unit residential buildings over 6 stories and hotels and a few other building types. So that's the current standard for large Part 3 buildings for operating emissions. And then for embodied carbon, there's but in 2020, council passed a motion, a climate emergency motion, and staff responded by creating a climate emergency response plan. And as part of that, we set goals for reducing embodied carbon in new construction buildings. And in the goal by 2030 was to try and reduce embodied carbon in all new buildings by 40%. So we're gradually ramping up those requirements in the Vancouver Building Bylaw. In 2023 was adopted that projects have to start reporting emissions, and then projects can't exceed a target of double the baseline emissions, which was just a really loose target just to get people used to the idea of calculating the embodied carbon emissions.
I know that you have also been involved with some new construction projects with the City of Vancouver. Are you just taking the same approach as the city's bylaws are requiring, or are you pushing the envelope a little bit more? I heard more of the latter. Can you tell us a bit about your approach with new buildings in Vancouver?
Yeah, so so we're always trying to be one step or a few steps ahead with our own city-owned buildings, and we have been the whole time I've been at the city. Generally, the strategy has been to have a few different stages of requirements for different building types, and then have city-owned buildings adopt the targets that we're aiming for in the future. So back when I started in 2013, we didn't have the Vancouver Building Bylaw didn't contain any greenhouse gas emission targets, but it had some energy reduction targets below ASHRAE. So that was kind of the bare minimum. Then we had a green rezoning policy that adopted more stringent energy performance targets, and it required LEED Gold. for large sites being redeveloped. And then we had a more aggressive standard called the tall building standard for iconic tall buildings in the city. And then we exceeded that standard with our own city-owned buildings. So then as the different policies have developed over time, it's been the same story where there's been kind of multiple stages, and with our city-owned buildings, we've always led. So when the zero emission building policy was adopted in 2016, it said, well, we'll try and get buildings to zero emissions by 2030 across the city. So we just said, okay, with our own buildings, let's try and get them to zero emissions now. So we immediately adopted a standard where we build all our new buildings to be 100% electric and passive house certified. And we've been doing that now with pretty well all our buildings since 2016. And we've got there's about 6 projects that are completed, and another 6 that are under design or construction right now. And so we've been quite successful with that. And then the same with the embodied carbon target. So as I said, the city, we want to get this citywide, the Vancouver building bylaw to 40% reduction by 2030. So when that was adopted in 2020 through the Climate Emergency Action Plan, we adopted that target for our own buildings, of 40% reduction. And we've been pushing that target, since 2020. So we've probably got about 6 or 8 projects where we've been attempting to get to 40% reduction. We haven't always gotten there, but has been a stretch target for us.
I'm really curious about how did those internal policies get passed? Like, what role did you play in encouraging the city to have more progressive targets for their own civic buildings?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's always been, the whole time I've been at the city, we've always had progressive mayor and council, and then just really excellent staff in our sustainability group. So in general, council will come up with a concept like, well, there's a climate emergency and we need to respond to it. And then staff, really excellent sustainability staff, come up with detailed plans that then get adopted by council. And as part of that, it's always like, well, we want to always have this multi-stage process going where we've got different building types or building groups that are able to exceed the standards earlier. That's always been the intention. So I've worked with sustainability staff on all of those reports as they've been developed over time, and then they've always said, well, how far can we push it with our city-owned buildings? And then I've always said, well, we can always push it to the end, so let's just adopt the end point right now as part of the council report. So we've done that we did that back with the Greenest City Action Plan. We did it with there was a renewable city strategy in 2015 where we developed our own renewable strategy for city-owned buildings, and that's where we set a really aggressive target for reducing greenhouse gas emissions in our new and existing buildings. And then, multiple plans over time.
It's commendable to have a city set a plan, but actually lead by example, right? You've kind of done that where you basically said, this is where we want everybody to go and we'll go first. And that's, I think, just quite a lead that you set for the rest of industry to follow. About retrofits, Craig, like what are I don't know if you've covered this, I don't think you did, but like what are the current standards that Vancouver has for non-city owned buildings and city owned buildings? You talked a lot about new construction. How about the retrofit or existing buildings?
There's recently been some equipment standards adopted for changing out hot water systems in Part 9 buildings. But for large buildings, there hasn't been too much in place until 2023. The city adopted the annual greenhouse gas and energy limits bylaw, where it required large Part 3 buildings to start reporting their greenhouse gas emissions and then gradually bring in greenhouse gas limits to certain building types over time. So in June of 2024 was the first reporting period where reporting was required, and it required that all Part 3 buildings over 100,000 square feet report their emissions. And then it's going to keep on ramping up with adding more building types and smaller buildings, 50,000 square feet, and then get smaller. And then in 2026, it's going to bring in greenhouse gas limits to those buildings where the buildings have to achieve those greenhouse gas intensity limits or else pay a penalty or for their carbon emissions. But then for city-owned buildings, it's the same. We've always said, well, we want to show leadership. So back with the when the I guess we first adopted some really strong standards when the city adopted the renewable city strategy in 2015, and so as part of that, we developed our own renewable energy strategy for city-owned buildings. And the renewable city strategy set a target of 100% renewable energy across the city by 2050. So we said, okay, well, let's exceed it with our own buildings. And so we set a target of 100% greenhouse gas emissions by 2040. So we've been working towards that ever since. So we have to do quarterly reporting on our greenhouse gas emissions and bring them down. And we've generally been staying right on target of ramping down, reducing our greenhouse gas emissions towards that 2040 target. And then that that renewable energy strategy for city-owned buildings, we had multiple steps in it. As we said, well, we'll build all our new buildings to be zero emissions. When we renew buildings, we'll build them to a zero emission standard. When we do retrofits, we'll do electrification, convert gas systems to electric. We'll connect up to low carbon district energy systems. We'll bring in renewable energy components like solar, and do some building envelope upgrades. And then I think the 8th pillar of that approach said, well, by 2040, we should be able to get our emissions down pretty close to zero, but we're always going to have a little bit of gas. So let's leave the door open to buy some renewable natural gas in 2040 to get us to that zero emission target. And then we've been working with our engineering department who's pulling methane from our city-owned landfill, and we have a right to first refusal for the renewable natural gas that comes off of that. So we've got that set up to clean up the last 15% we're estimating of our GHG emissions in 2040. So we've set these really aggressive standards. So then we say, well, okay, well now let's retrofit all of our buildings. So we've always taken a really strong approach to retrofitting the buildings. We benchmark our buildings and create quarterly benchmarking reports in terms of greenhouse gas emissions and target the biggest greenhouse gas emitters. And we've gotten funding from council specifically to target those buildings. And then we've aggressively implemented GHG retrofits.
So Craig, I hear you say we a lot, and I know it does take a team, but I've also heard from talking a lot of the staff team that you are actually a key person who has driven a lot of the projects forward. And I also recognize that electrification, which has been a part of a lot of your retrofit projects, is challenging. So I'm hoping that you can talk a little bit about like your personal leadership and how you've been able to get some more buy-in from at the staff level, and what kind of you know, upskilling had to happen in order for the team to be able to operate these buildings in a slightly different way?
Yeah. So yeah, so in the early days, well, we have a capital maintenance department that's responsible for replacing major equipment in our large buildings, which a lot of large municipalities would have a similar department. And yeah, in the early days, the real challenge was that they were focused on replacing equipment like for like. So if a gas-fired rooftop came to the end of its life, or a boiler, um, or you know, other gas-fired equipment, gas-fired domestic hot water heating systems and things like that. The capital maintenance department would just replace it like for like. They would, instead of doing a study, they would just they'd already know how much it's going to cost, or they'd do a little bit of a costing exercise to replace it like for like, and then just hire a consultant to design it like for like. So then the challenge for me as you know, we started adopting all these policies and aggressive targets was changing the mentality in the organization to, instead of changing them like for like, to change gas equipment to electric equipment. And it was, yeah, a real challenge at the beginning. So our capital maintenance department would have projects, and they would come forward and they'd be like, okay, we're going to put a new boiler in here. And I'm like, no, you're not. We have to, you know, use a low carbon option. And they're like, well, we don't have the budget to do that, and our consultants don't know how to do that. So I would hire consultants and do the feasibility studies to look at different options, then compare different options. And then I got a separate budget from approved by council to target energy retrofit projects. So separate from the capital maintenance projects, so we could add funding to projects to make them go ahead. So in the early days, I would take those capital maintenance projects, hire consultants to do the feasibility studies, and then use my funding, and then I would deliver the projects myself rather than our capital maintenance department. That went on for quite a few years. So basically I was managing all of the retrofits for replacing boilers and putting in heat recovery on pools and ice rinks and things like that. And then gradually over time, well, it really got helped by having these policies in place. So then I would, you know, keep saying, well, you can't just replace like for like, you have to do it low carbon options. So eventually the department expanded. We created it was called a sustainment department at the time, which looked at trying to do a better job of planning in the long term for capital maintenance projects, prioritizing projects. And then that we hired 2 mechanical engineers. Now we have 3 mechanical engineers in that department and 2 electrical engineers. And when they came on board, it was the same. They were saying, "Oh, we can't replace that boiler with a heat pump. It's not possible." And well, yes, you have to. That's our policy. And then the person who looks after the budget would say, "No, we can't do it because it's more expensive." And I would say, "Well, yeah, but I've got some extra funding that I can add to the project." And then actually another good point is that along the way, we also developed an internal carbon pricing policy, which really helped. So when we do, when we do the feasibility studies for the projects, we look at that internal carbon price, which started out at $150 a ton back when we developed the policy around 2016 or 2018 or whenever it was. It's up to $195 a ton now. So then gradually it got the engineers converted over to doing feasibility studies, at least on these projects, instead of just doing them like for like, and then giving this carbon pricing policy to the consultants to look at, and then we're looking at the viability, and and then I would find some funding from my targeted pot. We would apply for funding from external funders like FCM and the federal government Green Inclusive Building Program and things like that. So so gradually things changed. And now those that's the standard policy. I don't have to do those feasibility studies anymore. The engineers in our sustainment department do them, and they get the consultants to look at the different options. We still study it to make sure that it's viable. There's the odd project where we'll still replace a gas boiler with a gas boiler if the building's only planned to be kept for a couple of years, or there's a really good argument for it. But in general, all gas-fired systems, or almost all gas-fired systems, now get replaced with low-carbon systems. And then it was really helpful to have the Climate Emergency Action Plan adopted in 2020, which had a line in it that said that all for city-owned buildings, all heating systems replacements will be replaced with low carbon options unless deemed unviable. So that was 5 years ago now. So I've been able to say no, you can't replace it with a gas-fired option because it's a council policy. So it's really helpful to be able to say that it's in a high-level policy and that we don't have any choice. So yeah, it's been bumpy. The first retrofits we did with heat pumps, we had struggles with commissioning, with controls. We blew up a few heat pumps in early days because they were cycling too much or didn't have enough water flow to them or other problems. And but I built up a controls team in our department to help commission those projects, which is hugely essential. We've worked the bugs out with the suppliers and with come up with control strategies, and things are working a lot smoother now. We didn't have any maintenance contracts for heat pumps in the early days, so the first heat pumps we were having installed weren't being maintained properly. So eventually we worked with the maintenance departments and getting proper maintenance contracts in place for maintaining the heat pumps. So yeah, now things are working quite smoothly.
You worked on a lot of buildings, obviously, over the last 12, 13 years. And in fact, we've written a number of case studies on them as well. Like when I say we, the Zero Emissions Building Exchange, ZEBEX, which is one of the 5 decarb programs that we have at Zeek. I think of Firehall 17. I think there's a case study on City Hall as well, 825 Pacific. I mean, of all the buildings that you worked on over your tenure there at the City of Vancouver, what stands out? Like, are there certain buildings or moments that are most memorable to you?
Yeah, there's we've done a lot of really amazing projects. We've done we installed the first CO2 based heat pump at Kitts Pool a few years ago. We've done a ton of heat recovery projects at our ice rinks and community centers. We've got like 5 or 6 or maybe more ice rinks around the city, and we've put ice rink heat recovery on all of them now, except for West End Community Center, which we were actually, there was a plan to redevelop it, so we didn't go ahead with the heat recovery on that. There's a couple that were planned to be redeveloped, and now we're not going to redevelop them anymore. So we're starting to put heat recovery on those as well. So that's been like huge in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions from our community centers. But a few like specific projects that I really enjoyed was Blowdell Conservatory was a really fun project where it's a large kind of greenhouse gas type dome in the city, a big tourist spot full of exotic plants and birds, and had these massive gas-fired boilers and a chiller that was at the end of its life. So we put in a giant 200-ton air source heat pump on that project a few years ago, and it was quite successful. But the exciting thing from that project was from a technical perspective, we used there's 8 air handlers in the Blowdell Conservatory that have heating coils and cooling coils in them, and the cooling coils in our buildings are always a lot larger than the heating coils because the temperature difference for chilled water supply is a lot lower than heating water supply. So we ended up using the chilled water coils. We hooked the heat pump up to the chilled water coils instead of the heating coils to heat the building, and we did that strategy in that building. So that means we didn't have to retrofit anything else. We didn't have to retrofit the coils or put in any other heating distribution systems. And the big challenge with heat pumps is that they produce heating water at quite a lower temperature than boilers. So you need to figure out how to distribute that lower temperature heat. So that using the chilled water coils worked out really well in that project, and we've adopted that standard in multiple projects now. We retrofit our VPD, Vancouver Police Department Annex building with the same way. We replaced the chiller, put in an air source heat pump, hooked it up to the chilled water coils, and we use that to heat the building, and we've done that on multiple other projects. And then, so lots of fun projects on the retrofit side. On the new construction side, all of the passive house, 100% electric passive house projects have been totally fun to work on. Probably the most memorable, though, is the Firehouse 17, which was our first project. At the time in 2016, we were trying to decide what would be our first passive house project, and we were trying to decide, oh, well, it could be, we were building a low-income housing. We were actually tearing down an old building and rebuilding a new building, Rodden Lodge, in the downtown east side. It's a 10-story concrete social housing project with 200 units of social housing and a community center on the bottom 2 floors. And we were trying to decide, okay, do we do Rodden Lodge as our first passive house project or do Firehall 17? And we decided the project manager and the head of our planning and development department didn't want to go with Rodden Lodge because there weren't any locally available windows, and we'd have to import the windows from Europe. So we decided to go for the Firehall 17 project as our first project instead. So, which is like probably the most challenging building that you could possibly pick to be your first passive house project. But it worked out really well. It was amazing project with an amazing design team, and then the fire department just absolutely loves it, and the deputy fire chief just raves about what a wonderful building it is because it doesn't shake like the old building. It's comfortable and quiet, and all the firefighters just all want to work out of that building. And then he wants all our other fire halls to be passive house as well because that one was such a success. So
that's great. Thanks so much, Craig. You've had those are such great stories, and it sounds like you worked on a bunch of incredible projects. I wonder if you could share some wisdom and some advice with other people maybe working in municipalities that are getting into building decarbonization. How do they make it a priority, such as the City of Vancouver has?
Yeah, so the number one thing is to have some kind of policy at the highest level that you can refer to. So, I've worked in a number of organizations like BC Housing and the Rocky Mountain School District and the City of Vancouver, and all those organizations. We first kind of developed those high-level master plans. It's been really easy at the City of Vancouver because of really strong council and mayor leadership, but you don't necessarily need leadership at that level. Management can develop those plans themselves and push to have them adopted, which is what we did at BC Housing. When I was there, we created our first green plan and set a lot of strong targets in that. Without having to go to the board for approval. So yeah, that's absolutely essential, because every day when I'm at work, people are asking, well, do we really have to hit this embodied carbon target? And the answer is yes, we have to, because it's in the it's been passed by council. Do we have to build 100% electric? Yes, because it's in this council report. Do we have to retrofit with a electric system instead of gas? Yes, because it's in the council report. I have to do that every day, even though I'm the one who wrote those things into the reports. Nobody cares as long as they're in the report. So your organizations have to set a really strong upper level plans, and then you need to hire really good consultants. I'm always sticking to the same consultants. I hunt around the city for the best consultants I can find, especially on the retrofit side, but on new construction side as well. We set the passive house standard for our new construction buildings, and that really thins out the consultant groups to those who have experience with passive house. And even if we weren't going to build the project to a passive house standard, at least we end up with consultants with a really strong focus on reducing energy consumption. So hiring good consultants, and then having good strong internal staff, particularly on the controls side. So with electrification, it's all about controls and commissioning. And we've really struggled with the city over time with commissioning. We have commissioning agents hired by the mechanical contractors on our projects. We hire commissioning providers. We have similar to what LEED requires for commissioning providers. And then with those, we've always struggled over time to get the buildings commissioned properly. And now things are way better because we've developed our own internal teams of control staff. So I built up a controls department in my department, took it away from the operations department, moved it into the energy group, and hired staff. And now we have a really strong controls group that reviews has developed specifications. They review the projects as they go through design. They review the shop drawings as they get to shop drawings, and they get heavily involved in commissioning the projects. And that's made all the difference. Without that, we'd still be having projects with heat pumps blowing up.
We want to thank you for your time today. I think you've shown incredible leadership within the municipal government realm or domain, and what a great example for others to follow. If they can take some of these words of wisdom here and implement them in their own municipalities, I think we'd have even more of a driving force of change here, led by local government. So you've been really generous with your leadership at the City of Vancouver, and also with us, and giving us your time. You're on your way out of the City of Vancouver now in quasi-retirement or semi-retirement phase. So I want to congratulate you on that, and thank you for your time.
Yeah, well, thank you.